Hello, I'm Grant, and I want to talk about eggs because in the vein of the show, which was all about trying to reuse ingredients and make them into fancier versions of recipes using leftovers and just what's already around the kitchen, eggs are so great. Scrambled eggs, omelets, you can just put absolutely anything in. But I wanted to target one in particular, which is the quiche. It's something where it has a certain level of prestige. It's a little bit fancy because you use things like cream and leeks and all that, and you have to get a pie tin. But really, it's very easy, and just like any other egg, you can toss anything in. So today we're gonna actually be making quiche with ham, cheddar cheese, fontina, leeks, red peppers, but you can go crazier. You can use things like spinach, any kind of onions, shallots, garlic. I'm sure you could use sausage, you could use bacon, just really honestly anything that you would like, you can pretty much toss in, and it's a great dish. In particular, I think one of the best uses for a quiche would be if you have, say, relatives coming over for Easter or something and you have a big meal, like say you're gonna make a giant ham. Well, you can take all the stuff you have from that dinner, say leftover ingredients, leftovers from the meal itself, and all you have to do is say buy a pre-made pie tin or just use the crust you can make yourself, which is also very easy. And then you can just take all those ingredients, get some eggs, which you probably have around anyway, and you make this really nice, crispy, like broiled cheese top quiche, and it just looks amazing and it looks like you planned everything out. When in reality, you just thought ahead, got a pie tin, cut some stuff up, tossed it all in, and in say about 30 minutes, you have a really nice, fancy dish that goes a long way. So I'm Grant, welcome to Second Plate, and let's get cooking. The first thing that I want to do is I actually want to get the pie crust going. This is a frozen, free-formed one. I actually do recommend making your own, but I wanted to show off that it's perfectly fine to use something like this. Pie crust itself, it only takes you an extra maybe like 20 minutes. And one thing I like about it is I actually have one idea that I'd love to try with this is get a good like cast iron to put this in, make my own crust, and make it purposely kind of misshapen so it hangs over one of the edges and it kind of like puffs up on the side to give it a real like home feeling, like it's homemade and you made it all yourself. But I wanted to show off that it's pretty easy because I got this is just frozen, I just let it thaw out while I was prepping for the show. The only thing I do have to worry about is I have to make sure that this gets cooked enough in addition to the eggs. Because one big issue with eggs in general is they cook at a different speed than a lot of stuff you'll put them in. So I need to essentially pre-bake this, which is something you'll do anyway if you're doing your own crust, so that I can get this starting and going and golden and brown and make it fairly crispy so that when I cook it, I don't end up with a soggy, undercooked dough and really tough, overcooked plasticky eggs. So I'm gonna go ahead and put these in here. It's currently 425. I'm gonna put it in for about 10 minutes, but more realistically with this dish, I'm not gonna be too specific about temps because I just watch it and you'll kind of see. And really it's just there to help you. Like there's nothing stopping you from just turning down the heat and then letting the eggs cook a little bit slower. It's something where you just kind of have to feel it out. I chose for a thicker, high pie tin, so that's why I kind of make sure I do that. Whereas if I used a very small, thin one, that would affect the timings and how much I want to do it ahead of time. If you made your own dough, of course, you'll have to like form it to your pan with like pie weights or like rice and all this other stuff. But I just wanted to call that out, get that in there, and then we're gonna get to chopping some vegetables. So the first thing here is a leek. I've actually never worked with leeks. I've seen them before, but I've always been for green onions. But honestly, like this is basically just a green onion, so I figured I'd go ahead and give it a shot. Just gonna go ahead and just strip off some of these worst layers, and we're going to clean it and chop it. So I'm just gonna start cutting off this little head, or a root, I suppose. Get some of these top stuff. I don't know if there is a specific spot where you're supposed to cut it from, but I just always kind of wing it like, it's really, I think, easy to just ask, like, do you want to eat that? Like, that spot's kind of odd, so just peel that off. You know, that's just my personal take. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to chop it just into rings. You can do them into strips like this, particularly if you have a really nice, wide, fat leek, but I'm just gonna go ahead and chop like this. I will be pre-cooking all the veggies just because I want them to lose their moisture. And I, in particular, want to call that out for, let me slice this one down, the spinach, because if you look over at this pot of spinach I have right here, that thing is massive. But if you actually cooked with spinach, I don't know the exact percentage, but it's pretty much just a lot of water. So that spinach is going to heavily condense. And we want to do that, one, because we want to fill our quiche with actually like good ingredients and stuff like that. But also, all that water is just going to cook off, and it's going to kind of bubble out of the quiche if we don't. So it's just something kind of nice to call out. Let's go through here, make sure these are all good. And I'm just going to dice them a little bit more. Get these nice and fairly small. I take out a nice little chunk there, and then we'll get them cooking over here on this stove. I generally try to start with onions first. I think the only thing, I think of it as different levels. Like I would put on onions and garlic first, unless I have potatoes. Then I would want those on way sooner, like before absolutely anything else. So I'm going to get this on. Everything else can kind of go in as is. Like I will be adding the ham to this, and I will actually add the spinach last. I don't know if there's any particular reason you need to, but I always have, because essentially I can't put all of the spinach on at once just because there's just too much of it. So I'll usually leave it to the end so I can just say add a little bit more, add a little bit more. Plus then I'll give time that once everything else is kind of cooked down, particularly the onions and the juices from the ham, they can kind of just stew in there. And it's got a really nice little mix. So, red peppers. So, conventional logic says that there's no difference in taste between red, green, orange, purple. I choose red. It's purely for just a cosmetic choice. I have a lot of green. Eggs are yellow or white if you use egg whites. To my knowledge, you can use egg whites in a quiche. But red is a nice little additional color to spice it up a little bit. Although, my biased opinion is I like orange the best. Can't tell you why, just I always like those. Right. Next, I have a honey ham here. You obviously don't need this much. I'll be honest, my mother cooks a lot of quiche. That was like her big recipe where, again, she could like put everything together and make a fancy dinner, but she always would make it with a deli ham because that's what we had around. So I sprung for this, and I'm actually going to cut it into cubes. But again, just throw whatever you want in it, experiment. Like sausage, honestly, would easily work. Bacon, anything. I'm sure you can get some like really nice beef even, but I feel like eggs, cheddar, ham, that's like the classic thing to put in with your eggs. Which, based off this, you should be able to tell like my favorite omelet is a Denver omelet. Which I remember when I worked at a basically a small little breakfast store. I remember the first time someone came in and they told me like, oh, I want a Denver omelet, because it wasn't anything on our menu. We just had like a la carte, like tell us what you want in it. And I had no idea what it was. And now it's just so crazy that once I heard that, it's like, oh yeah, of course that's a thing. How did I not know that? So I'm just going to dice these, get as thick as you want. One reason I am going to do cubes, because you could do strips with all these, but you have to keep them back in mind. The quiche is basically a pie, or almost like a cake. So I don't want anything that's going to make it really hard to cut into, because I'm probably going to cut into it with, say, just a butter knife or a small little spatula. So if I have a long strip of ham that it can't easily cut through, that's just going to get dragged out when you cut it. Again, it doesn't affect the flavor at all. It probably actually is better flavor if you have those giant chunks, but then it's harder to get a nice little piece. So let's get this. I'm actually going to add a little olive oil here. Help this get going. And again, really, I'm not particularly sauteing these or anything super fancy. I'm just trying to get most of the moisture out so we can serve it in our quiche. Cool. Coat that as best we can, and we're just going to let that sit. We're going to add a bunch of spinach. I'm sure there's also plenty of ingredients you could probably add just as is. Like bacon, it's cured, you don't need to cook it. I just like how it kind of caramelizes and it just tastes great. Plus, as I've been doing more and more cooking, it's a very common idea that you add the meat in, it's going to leak its juices a little bit, and then that's what's going to give you some more flavor on your other ingredients. All right. So just to go through other things we're going to be putting in the quiche, I have some 2% whole milk, heavy whipping cream. For my cheeses, I have cheddar, just because that's my go-to, and in particular the fancier cheese is I have Fontina, I'm actually going to cube this because the idea is I want the shredded cheddar to make up the majority of my quiche, and then I just want nice little chunks of this fontina cheese, which is like softer. It's like almost like a baby Swiss. I'm not super well versed on cheeses, but it's kind of nice, and you can tell when you hit one of those. Ideally, you can shred this as well. I don't have a great shredder, and since this is more of a softer cheese, it just seems to gunk up my hand shredder. So that's where I kind of got the idea of, well, let me cube it and just kind of toss it in. If I had it around the kitchen, which I don't, I would also go goat cheese, like blue cheese and stuff. I've been wanting that around more and more often just because it's kind of neat. And for just randomly finding a chunk of it in your food, that's kind of a good cheese for that. Same with this fontina. I wouldn't make the entire quiche out of that, but just something to call out. Okay. That's good. We'll just put this right here. Okay, I'm going to pull this out. That actually looks like it's coming along pretty well. Let me turn down this temperature and pull this out for now. Just going to set it aside. Might be a little bit more than we need, but what we can do is I'll just turn down the temperature when we get the final one. You never really know what you're getting with like the store-bought pie crust. Like what I'm already noticing about this is the ones I was using previously also in this pack, they were really flaky and always broke, whereas this is actually baking really nice and went way sooner. But everything looks good. We can see our spinach starting to go down. And then we're going to move on to the actual eggs, which the eggs you put in, I believe it's actually becomes more of a custard, is its official designation. But essentially it's just going to be really fancy scrambled eggs with a lot of fat added in the form of cream and milk and other things like the cheese. Turn this up to keep it going. Keep adding the spinach. Again, I have a fairly deep dish, so I want to get a lot in here. And I'm going to be using the egg mixer to fill in all the nooks and crannies, so that's why I have a lot for this relatively small pan. Cool. So I have my bowl and my eggs. I am going to be thinking about 4 eggs for this size. Going to crack them as is. I think out of all the cooking skills, besides knife skills, the fanciest one to me has always been like working with eggs. So when I worked at that like breakfast area, we had essentially just a giant griddle that the cook worked on. And it always amazed me that she just had it so she could take a metal skillet and just pull them on, and she just whacked them perfectly where it would split the egg down the middle, and then she'd scrape it off. So you didn't get any shell in it, but it was so much faster than doing that all by hand. So we got our 4 eggs. Going to go ahead and just whisk them together, piercing the yolks. Just trying to keep an eye on everything. What is nice about this, again, I believe it's called custard mix, is you can make this ahead of time. And that's honestly just so nice, where you can just have this chilling in your fridge. You don't even need to know like how much you're going to put in the pan. You don't need to know, say, what your ingredients are. Just get that ready ahead of time. Keep moving this camera around. Now you can start to see this cook down. Let's keep adding this in. I like a lot of green. This spinach is what I'm relying on that green for. Cool. Just gotta keep that going. That's the real trick to a lot of these, again, like egg dishes, is just trying to manage everything at once. Next, I just have this heavy whipping cream I'm gonna add in addition to the milk. Generally, I want to open it first. I try to add, I don't know, maybe about half of this volume worth of the additives. I think it's like, most recipes I saw, it's like for 5 eggs, you add, say, a cup of the milk and a cup of the cream. But it's up to you. But this is where a lot of the quiche kind of flavor comes from, and this is where you get that nice white batter. It's something where I'm sure the more you do it, the more you can tell what you want. Like, to be honest, if you want probably really nice quiche, just pour a whole lot of it in there. That's probably what's going to make it really tasty. But I know myself, having had to make this several times, I don't want to eat a super massive calorie quiche dish all the time. Next, I'm going to add salt, about a tablespoon or so, and then pepper. I've seen other additives you can get in here. one I wanted to try but I couldn't actually find for today's show and I didn't want to go just randomly throwing things in is nutmeg. But again, it's something where you can really put whatever you want in here. Cool, and we have our little custard. Right, keep cooking this down until we have all our spinach basically like this right here. That kind of wilted spinach is what we want. It's up to you. I know some people aren't a fan of spinach just because of it smells bad if you overcook it. I believe the actual reason, like there's a lot of foods that are famous for people not liking, and I think I looked into it one time, and it's for a very specific reason, that they're all from the same genus, I think. I'm not great on my terms about that, but it's from like the Brocolli family, and it's like they all have this same property where if you overcook them, they begin to stink. And they're all things like broccoli, cabbage, lettuce, Brussels sprouts. And then once you kind of see like, oh, then maybe that kind of makes sense, where I could easily see like having a bunch of parents who say, just got whatever was like cheap or could easily fill out a dish, you know, because they have a lot of kids, and then just kind of looked away and they overcooked it, and that's how everyone remembers that dish or that ingredient. It smells bad, it's spongy, but it's not bad at all if you know how to cook it. Like I'm a huge fan of Brussels sprouts. I don't make them often, but they're pretty cool. All right, so we're getting low enough that this is probably gonna be good. There's still a little bit of water in some of these red peppers. I don't think it's gonna be too bad, but what I would do is probably just toss those on a little bit earlier again. I think it's just because we have so much of them relative to everything else, but I think we're good enough to get going. So again, I'm just gonna make sure I have this turned to what I want. I'm gonna set about 325. The biggest thing is just trying to time all of that. Like I said, I don't want to overdo that or under that, but it's not a huge deal. I find, even though it was one of the first things I started with, the hardest thing for me to master seems to be bread. It just varies a lot from, I guess, recipe to recipe, day to day. I think I told the story before where I couldn't get bread to work once I moved to a new apartment, and I basically found out that it's because I kept my apartment too cold and the yeast kept dying, which yeast is just like, it's just does whatever it wants. You know, sometimes like, oh, the water was the correct temperature, but you put in too much, or it was too cold, it died. Oh, you just got a bad packet, it died. It's actually a thing where I'm kind of concerned to do it on the show because I can't guarantee it's going to always work the way I expect it to. So let me go ahead and add this in. Just going to try and even it out as much as possible and get it below the rim so that my mixture can go over it. Although since I have a fair bit amount, it's not the end of the day if some of it pokes out. Because I don't think anyone's going to complain like, oh, this quiche is like too many amazing toppings in it. Perfect. I'm just going to take a ladle and the bowl. And sometimes I use a ladle, sometimes I use just pouring it in. I find that like the higher it is, or rather, the closer your ingredients are to the top, the more you want the ladle, because you almost want these little valleys you have to fill in with your mixture. And at this point, this is when I would look and like, hey, if it doesn't cover everything I need it to, that's when I would go maybe add another egg or more cream, whatever you think is appropriate. Cool. And I like having the cheese on top. It's one of the main factors I personally look for doneness, because then you can see the cheese broil. And the other thing would be to basically poke it all the time. It's kind of like banana bread where you just stick like a toothpick in the center, and if it comes out clean, it's done. But I don't like getting it out constantly because the bottom will probably cook a little bit faster, at least in my oven. So the top will still look kind of liquidy, which you kind of want actually. And the inside's actually done. So I'm just going to put in some of these cubes, just wherever. Again, this is a very forgiving dish. Like if you burn the crust, not a big deal. If you put too much of an ingredient on one side, not a big deal. It always just kind of works out. Cool. And we have our quiche. So final step is just going to be putting it straight into our oven. Again, I just like to keep an eye on everything while it cooks and adjust it accordingly. Like I said, I'm going to lower this down probably to maybe 300 because this is actually a lot more crisper than I thought. So I just want to kind of keep an eye on it because I don't want to ruin the rates that they cook at. So got that 325. I'm going to carefully get this. You don't need a tray, by the way, but I like the tray because in using the frozen ones, they aren't very flexible, or they are too flexible, and the weight of the quiche can fold it, and it's just easier to not have to worry about any of that. So we're just going to toss this in and give it enough time to cook. After about 20 or so minutes in the oven, what I try to look for is the cheese we specifically put on top. It begins to bubble and cook. And then once I see that, because again, and this held true for this one, it seems to cook from the bottom up just because of how the pie crust and everything is arranged. So then what I do specifically is once I see that happening, I'll start to broil the top because that's what's going to give you this really nice browning effect on the top. And it lets you kind of seal the deal on your quiche and make it look really nice and fancy. You can see it's bubbling right now. So I'm going to go ahead and take it out. And I said earlier on the show that the way you kind of tell if it's done is similar to a soft bread like banana bread, where I'm going to be just taking a toothpick, going to be sticking it straight in the center, and ideally it should come out without being dirty at all. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Again, I use this pan, even though it's not necessary, to make sure it's nice and rigid. That looks really good. Going to turn off my broiler over here, just so I don't do anything crazy in the background. I'm going to take this and I'm just going to go in the center. It's going to be fairly hot. Come out. Still got a little bit of cheese coming out. I think I might have hit a cheese cube actually if I go in there. But perfect actually. It's actually a thing with eggs where this will kind of continue to cook for a while. So this is actually really nice where I'd want to then pull this off and get it on the table as everyone kind of arranges themselves. And then by the time you actually eat, the cheese will kind of reform and everything, and you can get it out. This is where, when you actually serve it, you can go a couple different ways based off what you put in the quiche. If you go for a really nice pie tin, particularly one that separates, it is possible to get the quiche out, and you can get really nice fine slices, particularly if you make your own pie dough and you can control how thick this crust is. Generally speaking, I consider it to be less of like a sliceable cake and more like a lasagna, where you just kind of get a chunk of it. So that's usually what I'll go for with like this, where I would just serve it kind of as is, and you try to cut it up, but really as soon as like 2 pieces are out, it's going to be just kind of a free-for-all where you just get a nice chunk. So we're going to go ahead and ideally I would let this rest a little bit because this is still particularly hot because of the broiler, but this makes a really just nice centerpiece. So I'm going to attempt, oh perfect actually, I think this is perfectly rigid enough. So I'm going to get this out here. Oh, perfect. My first quiche I did, it basically just kind of folded a little bit when I got to it. So I'm just so happy this fact that's holding that shape. And that's probably honestly like one of the best looking quiches I've made practicing this recipe so far. But yeah, so to reiterate about what I kind of love about this dish is, if you know this is coming, it's not hard at all to prep for it. You can make the custard egg mix ahead of time easily. I think I saw up to 3 days ahead of time as long as you refrigerate it and cover it, at which point you just need a pie filling or pie dough, which you can either buy just pre-made, like this was actually frozen, and I fully support just being able to use like pre-made ingredients like that because it makes it so much easier. And then all it becomes is you just need to slice up your ingredients, toss them in, toss it in the oven, and that's it. I chose to have red bell peppers in this. I used leeks, which is actually something I know I'm probably going to use way more of. Now I used ham, I used cheddar, and again fontina cheese. And really, you can use any cheese you want. Softer cheeses are better, but it's entirely up to you. I think one thing that'd be kind of fun is if you were going to go for a vegetarian quiche. I guess it's not vegetarian, but you didn't want the meat to be the feature as much. You could do a whole thing with the cheeses themselves, like really mix everything. I really love the idea of the cheese cubes because it just seems to add like a little bit, just an interesting thing to biting it, because you can make a quiche, like I want my quiche to be chunky. I want it to be like several different sections. I don't want this nice, homogeneous, perfectly mixed quiche. Like I would never blend the ingredients to get them perfectly distributed because I don't think that's what it's like. Like, you know, I want more like a, almost like a pizza or something where it's all interspersed and you're like, oh, one bite, it's like, oh yes, I got the ham, I got the cheese. Oh, I got like the really juicy spinach that just absorbed all of the juices from the ham and the cheese. And it's a great dish. And it just looks fancy. Like out of all the dishes I've done for the show, this is one where I'm so glad I have leftovers for. Like, I love all the other dishes, but this one's like, oh yeah, that's right, I have a whole quiche for dinner tonight. Or I know this is something I would actually see myself like bringing into work if I have extras, because it's just kind of cool, it looks cool, and it's awesome. It's like perfect, like kind of a centerpiece breakfast dish, which I don't feel like it's a lot harder to do that stuff for. So again, it's pretty easy, takes only about 20 minutes. Once you get stuff going, you can put anything you want into it, and it always honestly comes out pretty nice. And as long as you're adding enough cheese, fat, cream, eggs, it's always going to just taste delicious. So once again, I'm Grant. This has been Second Plate. The focus of the show is to reuse ingredients like our ham and our leeks and make awesome dishes that you wouldn't think possible, like our quiche.